Imagine this: a U.S. Navy attack submarine, a silent sentinel of American power, breaches the surface just 9 miles, 14.5 kilometers, off the coast of a hostile nation. The air is thick with tension. This wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate act of maritime brinkmanship, a clear display of gunboat diplomacy and a challenge to Venezuela's maritime sovereignty claims. But what happened next shocked the Pentagon and brought the two nations closer to an open conflict than anyone has ever publicly admitted. The Venezuelan Navy, in a brazen and aggressive move, responded by firing 2 live depth charges. They intended to sink a multi-billion-dollar American asset in a terrifying echo of the Cold War. The question is, why? Why did the sub surface so close? And what were the consequences of this shocking exchange? Today, we are diving deep into the declassified details of this almost forgotten incident, revealing the untold story of the U.S. submarine that stumbled into a geopolitical minefield. You are about to discover the full scope of this high-stakes maritime standoff and the secrets the two nations kept hidden for decades. Historically, the Cold War echo. The tension between the United States and Venezuela didn't start in the modern era. It has roots deep in the geopolitical shifts of the Cold War. To understand the depth charges, you must understand the historical context of the region. Venezuela, under its changing political landscape, became a hotbed of anti-American sentiment, often aligning with powers hostile to U.S. interests. This created a strategic choke point in the Caribbean, a vital sea lane for the U.S. Navy. The deployment of a nuclear attack submarine to this area was a clear demonstration of force and capability. The sub was a symbol of America's reach, a silent challenge to Venezuela's maritime sovereignty claims which often extended far beyond the universally recognized 12-mile limit of territorial waters. The Venezuelans viewed the sub's presence as an intolerable intrusion, a direct threat to their security and national pride. This is why their reaction, while extreme, was a predictable escalation of the unspoken rules of this high-stakes game. From a strategic standpoint, the strategic decision to surface, risk versus reward. The submarine that surfaced was no ordinary vessel. It was a silent hunter, specifically designed for covert intelligence gathering in politically sensitive waters. Its presence 9 miles, 14.5 kilometers, off the Venezuelan coast was a direct and deliberate challenge to the nation's perceived maritime control. The mission, likely sanctioned at the highest levels of the U.S. government, was to monitor Venezuelan military communications, acoustic signatures, and potentially track Russian or Cuban naval assets known to frequent the area. This type of close-in surveillance, known as covert close stalking, carries immense risk, operating right at the razor's edge of international law and local sovereignty claims. The boat was performing its core function, gathering data that no satellite or surface ship could acquire, operating in the crucial gray zone between peace and overt conflict. The captain's decision to surface so close remains shrouded in speculation. In submarine warfare, surfacing is the ultimate act of vulnerability, an admission of potential mechanical failure, a severe navigational error, or a desperate measure to communicate an immediate crisis. Given the sub's advanced technology, a mechanical failure is unlikely, suggesting the surfacing was either a calculated, high-risk political signal intended to provoke a reaction or a catastrophic navigational mistake that placed the vessel directly into the Venezuelan defensive net. Either way, the action instantly transformed a secret operation into an international incident, triggering the Venezuelan Navy's most aggressive response. The rules of engagement in such sensitive zones are clear. A hostile presence, particularly a nuclear-powered military vessel, operating within the claimed security perimeter, must be neutralized or driven out immediately, escalating the situation from espionage to a direct military challenge. Crucially, the Venezuelan response, brinkmanship in the Caribbean. The Venezuelan vessel that detected the American intrusion likely identified the target initially through passive sonar, followed by active pinging once the U.S. boat surfaced. The sight of a foreign nuclear submarine in their claimed waters, an undeniable symbol of U.S. power, would have been interpreted by Caracas as the ultimate act of provocation and a threat to national security. The decision to deploy depth charges was not merely a warning, it was a direct, albeit non-lethal, attempt to destroy or severely damage the vessel and demonstrate unwavering resolve. Depth charges, designed to create a devastating underwater shockwave, are relics of the Cold War, brute force weapons against submerged threats. Firing them at a surfaced, though hostile vessel, indicates a willingness to escalate beyond mere verbal or diplomatic protests. The initial detonation of the two charges would have sent seismic waves through the water, felt not only by the submarine crew, but likely by civilians on the nearby Venezuelan coast. The shockwave alone, even if the charges missed the hull, is sufficient to cause major internal damage, disabling sensitive electronics, damaging the reactor's structural integrity, and severely injuring the crew. Inside the American submarine, the detonation would have been an auditory and physical shock, transitioning the crew from a state of silent, covert operation into an immediate, high-stakes combat survival mode. The sub's immediate response would have been an emergency deep dive, engaging all counter-detection measures and transmitting an urgent contact report back to its command, triggering a rapid, top-level crisis response at the U.S. Pentagon. This single dramatic naval engagement became the focal point of a dangerous geopolitical game, forcing both nations to immediately calculate the risks of all-out war. Following this, the silence after the shockwave, diplomatic scramble. The immediate aftermath was defined by a deafening silence and a frenzy of covert communication. The U.S. submarine, having performed an emergency evasive maneuver, would have quickly utilized its stealth capabilities to disappear back into the vastness of the ocean, leaving the Venezuelan frigate to assess the damage and report the incident back to Caracas. The absence of immediate retaliation from the U.S. Navy was deliberate. The incident had to be managed with extreme caution to prevent an already volatile situation from spiraling into a full-scale military conflict. Washington's response was surgical and discreet, utilizing secure back channels for immediate diplomatic engagement. The primary goal was to contain the narrative, prevent any public disclosure of the Venezuelan aggression, and avoid a retaliatory strike that could have justified an armed response from the Venezuelan side, potentially drawing in their geopolitical allies. The event quickly became a historical footnote buried deep within the archives of both the Pentagon and the Venezuelan Naval Command, only to be partially revealed years later through declassified intelligence reports and accounts of the sailors involved. This selective memory served both governments. For the U.S., it avoided admitting a major naval security breach and a severe national embarrassment. For Venezuela, it allowed them to claim a silent, symbolic victory against a superpower without facing overwhelming retaliation. The crew of the U.S. sub, sworn to secrecy, carried the psychological burden of a near-death experience, a moment of profound vulnerability where technology failed to ensure their safety. This terrifying exchange of force remained one of the most serious, yet least known, military confrontations in the Caribbean, highlighting the fragility of geopolitical peace. Next up, lessons in gray zone warfare and naval doctrine. The 9 Mile incident provided the U.S. Navy with invaluable, albeit terrifying, lessons in gray zone warfare. This term describes military conflicts below the threshold of declared war, and the submarine's near catastrophe emphasized that traditional rules of engagement are rapidly deteriorating. The Navy learned that in areas of high geopolitical tension, a hostile nation is willing to deploy disproportionate force to defend perceived territorial boundaries and assert sovereignty, even against a technologically superior adversary. This event became a case study that drove significant changes in naval strategy, particularly in two key areas: improved stealth and counter-detection. The incident accelerated investments into next-generation sonar baffling, hull coatings, and counter-detection technologies to ensure that future submarine missions in contested waters would not face a similar catastrophic detection and subsequent attack. Escalation protocol revisions. The near war prompted a stringent review and revision of the Rules of Engagement, ROE, for covert operations. Commanders were given clearer, more concise protocols for handling detection, avoiding unnecessary provocative maneuvers, like intentional surfacing, and determining the appropriate level of response to hostile intent. Furthermore, the human element inside the steel monster. Beyond the geopolitical implications, the story of the submarine incident is a profoundly human one, a testament to the resilience of the men inside the steel monster. The crew, operating for weeks in an environment of absolute silence and constant tension, suddenly experienced the sheer terror of combat. The sound of a depth charge detonation, even at a distance, is described by veterans as the most terrifying noise in the ocean, a massive, concussive hammer blow against the hull that instantly turns the pressurized environment into a shaking, echoing tomb. The sudden shift from stealth to survival required instant, flawless execution of emergency procedures, a task for which these elite sailors were rigorously trained. The psychological toll on the captain and his crew would have been immense. In the tight confines of the control room, every man would have been acutely aware that the vessel and their lives were completely at the mercy of the ocean and the next potential explosion. For the sub to evade subsequent attacks and silently slip away required not just technical expertise, but incredible mental fortitude and discipline, relying on the deep bond of trust that exists within a submarine crew. Their story, largely untold due to the classification of the mission, is a powerful example of the silent, unacknowledged sacrifices made by sailors in the U.S. Navy's most dangerous assignments. It embodies the spirit of unyielding resilience that defines the naval service. Moreover, the specter of escalation and global power shifts. This naval confrontation serves as a chilling case study of how quickly minor diplomatic incidents can spiral out of control in an era of renewed global power competition. The geopolitical stage is set for such encounters. A rising China asserting maritime claims, an aggressive Russia probing NATO defenses, and regional powers like Venezuela seeking to challenge American hegemony in their backyard. The 9 Mile incident provided a microcosm of these wider global tensions. It demonstrated a shift from the U.S. expecting subservience to being forced to accept real, kinetic challenges from smaller, yet determined, adversaries. The deployment of a U.S. nuclear submarine near Venezuelan territory was a calculated risk that, in this instance, backfired spectacularly, yielding not intelligence, but a harsh and violent lesson in overprovocation. The Venezuelan action exposed American vulnerability and drew international condemnation. This aggressive maneuver forced the U.S. to temper its immediate reactions, recognizing that a full-scale response could easily have been misinterpreted as an act of war, providing a strategic victory to Venezuela by exposing American vulnerability and drawing international condemnation. The incident remains a powerful, hidden narrative about the changing global balance of power and the constant danger of military miscalculation. In summary, technology versus terrain, the submarine's weakness. Despite the massive technological superiority of the American submarine, the incident underscored a critical weakness: the unforgiving nature of coastal terrain and shallow waters. A submarine's greatest advantage, its stealth, is severely degraded in the acoustic noise and complex bathymetry of a literal, coastal environment. The noise from commercial shipping, marine life, and complex seabed features makes it difficult for the sub's passive sonar to filter out threats, while also making it easier for a local, experienced Navy to detect a large, foreign intrusion. The shallow water near the 9 Mile line further complicated the American sub's maneuverability and depth control, forcing it into a kill zone where the older, less sophisticated Venezuelan depth charges could still pose a credible threat. For the U.S. Navy, this highlighted the need for specialized manned-unmanned teaming tactics and the development of smaller, more specialized vessels capable of operating effectively in the noisy, confined spaces of coastal waters, minimizing the reliance on large, nuclear-powered attack submarines in such risky close-quarter missions. The lesson was clear: technology is not a universal shield against the dangers inherent in navigating another nation's backyard, especially when that nation is willing to use deadly force as a political tool. The sea remains the ultimate equalizer, and history's forgotten near disasters, like this one, continue to define future naval doctrine. Let's discuss the untold fate of the Venezuelan frigate. While the U.S. submarine managed to slip away into the deep, the fate of the Venezuelan frigate that fired the depth charges is also a crucial part of this story. The vessel and its captain immediately became central figures in a high-stakes military and diplomatic storm. The captain would have been hailed as a national hero by Caracas for his decisive and aggressive defense of national sovereignty, a narrative that played well to the local political base. However, internationally, the action placed Venezuela in a precarious position, forcing its diplomatic corps to work overtime to justify the use of explosive force against a foreign vessel, especially one that surfaced a clear, if aggressive, indication of a non-hostile intent. The frigate itself would have undergone immediate and intense scrutiny. Intelligence reports suggest that Washington, in a silent but firm demonstration of its displeasure, initiated a covert campaign to isolate the captain and potentially target the frigate's operational capabilities through cyber means or selective diplomatic pressure on the supply chain of its military hardware. The intent was to send a clear message: the action was unacceptable, and there would be a silent price to pay. This illustrates the complex nature of the post-Cold War conflict, where the response to an open, kinetic act of aggression is often met with covert, technological, and economic warfare far from the eyes of the public. The captain, though potentially receiving a medal in Venezuela, would also have earned the lifelong scrutiny of the most powerful intelligence agencies in the world. Next, the deeper secrets of submarine warfare and deterrence. The proximity of the U.S. sub to the Venezuelan coast points to the deep, often unknown secrets of modern submarine operations. Submarines are deployed not just to gather intelligence, but also to execute a core strategy known as deterrence by presence. The sheer fact that a U.S. nuclear submarine could be that close, undetected until its deliberate or accidental surfacing, serves as a powerful, silent threat to any adversary. It means that, at any given moment, the United States has the capability to launch a decisive strike or disrupt crucial military assets without warning. This silent menace is what truly defines the power of the U.S. Navy's submarine fleet. However, the Venezuelan response exposed the limits of this deterrence. When deterrence fails, the situation rapidly devolves into a desperate fight for survival, as the crew experienced. The incident became a testament to the old naval adage: there are only two kinds of ships, submarines and targets. This event proved that even the most advanced stealth technology cannot guarantee safety when facing an enemy willing to break the conventional rules of engagement. The event is a crucial study for military strategists worldwide, a hidden warning that technological asymmetry does not always translate into strategic victory in the volatile, high-stakes game of global geopolitics. For our final point, the lasting legacy on naval doctrine. The 9 Mile incident forced the U.S. Navy to reevaluate the core tenets of its forward deployment doctrine. The assumption of operational superiority and near-total impunity in international waters was shattered. The legacy of this incident is evident in the modern Navy's shift toward multi-domain operations, emphasizing the need for synchronized intelligence gathering from air, surface, and subsurface assets to mitigate the risk of placing a single, high-value asset in such a vulnerable position. Furthermore, the incident is widely believed to have accelerated the development of non-acoustic detection methods and advanced countermeasures against sophisticated anti-submarine warfare (ASW) techniques, as reliance on traditional passive stealth proved insufficient in the noisy, complex coastal environment of a hostile nation. The Venezuelan action, in a twist of irony, spurred the U.S. Navy to become even more capable in the exact environment where it had suffered its greatest near defeat. The story of the submarine and the 2 depth charges remains a secret chapter in the history of naval warfare, a chilling reminder that, at sea, all rules can be broken in a moment of crisis. To conclude, the role of public diplomacy and media control. The decision by both Washington and Caracas to silence the story highlights the critical role of media control and public diplomacy in the post-Cold War era. For the U.S., public acknowledgement of the incident would have ignited a political firestorm, exposing the aggressive nature of its intelligence gathering and risking a public relations disaster that could have turned global opinion against them. It would have provided Venezuela with a powerful narrative of American bullying and military overreach, potentially drawing in anti-U.S. sentiment from across Latin America. Therefore, the incident was immediately classified at the highest level, transformed into a classified internal training module rather than an international crisis. For Venezuela, while the event was an internal victory, publicizing the use of depth charges would have created an international incident, risking severe economic sanctions and potentially a retaliatory military response from the U.S. Therefore, the Venezuelan media, heavily influenced by the government, never reported the full, kinetic details of the confrontation, allowing the event to become an open secret within the highest echelons of their military. A powerful but silent deterrent against future incursions. This mutual agreement to suppress the truth reveals that in modern geopolitics, controlling the narrative is often more valuable than achieving a temporary military victory, ensuring that the truth is tailored to serve the strategic interests of both nations, leaving the sailors involved to carry the untold story. Looking ahead, the unseen battlefield, cyber and electronic warfare. The encounter was not limited to the physical realm of the ocean. Behind the scenes, the event likely triggered an intense, unseen battle in the domain of cyber and electronic warfare. The U.S. Navy and intelligence agencies would have immediately launched an electronic counteroffensive, attempting to blind the Venezuelan frigate sensors and communication arrays to ensure the safe retreat of the submarine. This covert electronic skirmish would have involved jamming, spoofing radar signals, and attempting to penetrate the Venezuelan command and control network to gather real-time intelligence on their deployment and follow-up plans. Conversely, the Venezuelan military would have also attempted to exploit the U.S. submarine's momentary vulnerability by targeting its communications and navigation systems with electronic countermeasures, attempting to further disrupt its operations and make it easier to track. This multi-layered conflict illustrates that modern warfare is rarely a simple kinetic exchange. The true battleground is often found in the invisible spectrum of electromagnetic frequencies, where signals intelligence, cyber intrusion, and electronic jamming determine the ultimate outcome of a confrontation, far removed from the physical violence of a depth-charge explosion. The entire 9-mile incident was a terrifying dance between outdated kinetic weaponry and the cutting edge of electronic warfare, showcasing the complexity of military engagement in the 21st century. Lastly, the paradox of nuclear-powered attack submarines. The U.S. attack submarine, a technological marvel powered by a nuclear reactor, represents a paradox in modern naval warfare. Its ability to remain submerged indefinitely and carry devastating firepower makes it the most potent conventional weapon on the planet. Yet, its very nature, large, complex, and potentially carrying a nuclear payload, makes its vulnerability a global concern. The possibility of the sub being sunk or severely damaged so close to a foreign coastline raised immediate fears not just of a military conflict, but of a potential environmental catastrophe had the reactor been breached. This inherent risk forces the U.S. Navy to exercise extreme caution, which ironically provides adversaries like Venezuela with a form of diplomatic leverage. Knowing the catastrophic risk of sinking such a vessel, Caracas could be confident that the U.S. would not retaliate disproportionately, effectively allowing them to use the depth charges as a high-stakes, low-risk political tool. This strategic dilemma, where the immense power of the weapon also imposes limitations on its deployment, continues to shape naval strategy, particularly in sensitive coastal operations. The incident became a crucial factor in the Navy's long-term decision to invest in smaller, less conspicuous, and non-nuclear surveillance vessels for close-to-shore operations, mitigating the massive geopolitical and environmental risks associated with deploying a nuclear attack submarine into a volatile shallow water environment. The lesson learned was that the price of silent presence can, at times, be far too high. Additionally, the unsettled maritime claims and international law. The core of the incident lies in the ambiguous and often contested nature of maritime boundaries and claims in international law. While international law strictly defines territorial waters, nations often assert broader security zones, particularly near strategic choke points or hostile neighbors. Venezuela, utilizing its political position, has consistently pushed the limits of these claims, often viewing any foreign military presence within its claimed exclusive economic zone, EEZ, as an act of aggression. The U.S. Navy, operating under the principle of freedom of navigation, FONOPS, routinely sends warships into these claimed zones to assert the right to international transit. The submarine incident was a clash between Venezuela's maximalist security claims and the U.S. as assertion of international transit rights. The Venezuelan decision to fire live depth charges was a clear and unambiguous attempt to create a de facto exclusion zone, a unilateral assertion of maritime sovereignty backed by military force. This incident, though quickly suppressed, remains a textbook example of how a dispute over international maritime law can instantly escalate into a dangerous military confrontation, providing valuable, if terrifying, data for international legal experts and military planners on how maritime claims are asserted and contested in the real world. Finally, the final warning: A tale for future captains. The story of the U.S. submarine and the 2 Venezuelan depth charges has long since ceased to be a mere intelligence report. Within the close-knit, highly secretive culture of the U.S. Navy's submarine force, it has evolved into a cautionary tale, a grim yet vital oral tradition passed down to new generations of captains. It is a stark reminder that advanced technology is only as good as the judgment of the officer controlling it, and that the ocean's unpredictable nature, combined with geopolitical volatility, can instantly negate years of technological superiority. The phrase, the 9-mile line, has become a potent symbol within the submarine community, a silent warning against complacency and overconfidence in hostile waters. This incident, though denied in public history, is a fundamental part of the unwritten lore of the silent service, a lesson in humility and survival that continues to save lives and define the operational doctrine of the U.S. Navy's most elite force. It ensures that the sacrifices, the fear, and the lessons learned from that terrifying near disaster are never truly forgotten, remaining a permanent specter guiding the decisions of future submarine commanders.